mentioned before, he selected me to moderate here because I really don't know much about DAMS, so here I am. Today we have 3 esteemed panelists, sorry, 4, and they've already introduced themselves, so I won't go to that. But let's just get started and ask them some questions. This is as informal as it gets. So these are your peers here. So if you want to stand up and scream at them or ask them questions right in the middle, please don't let me stop you. Think of it as a party. Let's start off. I'd like to ask you guys each this question so we can get going. So tell us about your DAMS. Specifically, what are you running? What led you to select it? What sorts of things are you storing in it? How big is it? And how long have you been running it? Let's get the parameters.
I'll do this.
Go for it.
So about 10 or 11 years ago, about 10 or 11 years ago, we started a RDF DAMS. We had a lot of objects, about 250,000 objects that came from, you all heard of Art Store probably. Some of these objects that came from our slide collection, about 250,000 scans that were taken and put into the facility-based collections are there. So that went into Art Store, but then we also got all the objects back together. We had to put those under management, what they told me, in a dark archive. Because we can't really share them because of legal reasons and things like that, but Art Store can. But we wanted to, we had the assets, we had really good mark metadata on each one of them, so we stored all that, put it away, and started building a bunch of technology stacks based on microservices from the CDL concept for microservices. So we use ARCs for our identifier, and then we were finding that Mark was good, but we wanted to do some more XML-based or more modern metadata things, but we couldn't agree on specific standards. People were changing their minds all the time, the standards were changing, so we looked into a metadata called RDF, which lets us store any kind of metadata in a triple store, and we basically started there and kind of grew up to where we are now.
Yeah, and so where we are now is sort of an interesting hybrid at the moment. We still have our DAMS repository is our own homegrown RDF-based triple store, like Declan said. And so we have an API which talks to the triple store, and as part of our recent migration to using Hydra for our front end, we added to our API that talks with our backend repository to essentially intercept and communicate as if our repository was Fedora. And so we're able, it's around 20 or so API calls, which we're able to still have Hydra just natively talk to the repository layer, and it thinks it's talking to Fedora by and large. And so our new front end is Hydra, Ruby on Rails web app, and we still do have a Java management application which does a lot of batch processing and reporting. And so a lot of our more boutique collections that have to go in are done through that system. But yeah, using the Hydra stack, we've got Solar for indexing and discovery, and let's see what else. I think at the moment, in addition to the collection Declan talked about, we have about 7,000 to 8,000, because one collection is currently ingesting and it's a big one. Research data objects from research collections, spinning off of a pilot project we've been doing the last couple of years on campus. And then we have another about 70,000 objects from our library collections in the system right now.
So our main focus right now is on research data. We have the regular digital library collections that are flowing in normally. Then we're putting a lot of focus on research data. I said we started as a dark archive. They changed their minds about that too. A year into it, and they wanted to access layers on campus, and UC-wide, and public, that sort of stuff. So the system handles all that stuff in the triple store. One thing I did talk about was that one of the reasons we did RDF is we found that we want to do a lot of simple objects, but we have a lot of complex objects as well too. Things that have relations among the different pieces and parts of the object. So we want to be able to model that properly. We published an ontology for all of this, and we followed mostly our own data model, which is pretty cool. And we've got a lot of feedback on that data model, and we're actually going through a round right now of actually flattening it a little bit to make it a little bit more accessible. We seem to be the only ones using it, so we want to get more input on that.
I'm Betsy from CalTech. First thing I should say is most people don't realize how small CalTech is. has a big reputation, but it's actually a very small place. The library is small. We have 900 undergraduates and 1,200 grad students, so that's it. I have a kind of convoluted story about how we started running Islandora. A couple of years ago, about 2.5 years ago, our archives, which is part of the library, undertook a project to modernize all of its systems. They have homegrown FileMaker Pro systems for everything. And they wanted to be able to migrate their catalog, their photo database, their patron management system, their processing system, everything to new systems. So I was on a committee to look at solutions. And for the photo archive, we decided we were going to look at a full-scale DAMS because there were going to be far more things than photos in the future. We wound up with 3 finalists, which were Content DM, Islandora, and Fedora with Hydra Heads. We decided that Fedora and Hydra Heads was too much for us. There was at that time 1.5 programmers, and we just didn't have the resources. Content DM was attractive, and it was just right there, easy to do. But we wound up choosing Islandora because it's Fedora underneath. It's kind of future-oriented. We can do compound objects because of the way it allows you to relate objects to each other. A lot of things we wanted to do in the future that we haven't done yet. Okay. Because I was pretty swamped at the time, we contracted with Discovery Garden, which is the Islandora support organization in Prince Edward Island, kind of grew out of the Islandora development effort. And at the time was, I think, the only option. I think now there are other companies that provide Islandora support, and Cherryhill does. I think Lyrasis is a little bit, I'm not sure. We contracted with DGI to bring up our Islandora repository and migrate our photo database. I did a lot of massaging of data to feed it to DGI, other than I wasn't really involved with it. And they ran it hosted for us until about 2 months ago when we moved it to the local server. The idea was that we will now have local control. I have written one tiny little Drupal module to add a link to our Aeon patron request system. We have grand plans for the future, which I expect I'll get to talk about later. Right now, we have only an image collection live. It has about 10,000 photographic images in it. We have a great big server that we're running it on, and it only takes a little bit of that server because, once again, we're anticipating a great deal more in the future. Did I miss anything?
That seems to be pretty good.
Okay.
Again, my name is Steve Kutay. I oversee the development of digital collections. I'm somewhat recent to CSUN. I've been here about 3 years. There was an installation of Content DM, which we continue to run today. That was in existence and had a number of collections in it. So from an historical perspective, my colleague Elizabeth, who might be able to speak more, but I believe we've had it for around 10 years. With collections starting somewhere in 12 years, yeah, somewhere around 2002, 2003, where they started to build collections. Joshua, I know the institution also uses Content DM there. For those of you that are familiar with this system, it is a turnkey solution offered by OCLC. They currently have a version 6 out right now. The next version, however, is going to move to a host only, which means that you are contracting with them to actually take care of everything. You have the option right now, but to host it locally, which is what we do. But that's going to change with the next release of it. It's attractive for institutions that don't simply have a lot of resources to devote to customization and to developing individual and special services. And we're at a stage now where the collections are growing due to some grant work that we have. excuse me, and some developing needs that we're finding within the institution from other faculty and so forth has prompted us to sort of look at the larger picture.
That isn't working, so.
We have about 25,000 items of text documents and images that populate a number of collections there. You know, I have to say, it does what it says it's going to do. And it provides for the user a number of ways to search and access points. My only problem is the flexibility, and we might have a chance to get into that later. This is really timely for us because as other people are sort of doing the same thing, and actually maybe a little bit farther ahead, and looking at other kinds of solutions, open source solutions such as Hydra and so forth. This is going to sort of inform how we think about moving forward.
Good stuff. All right, those are good overviews. I'd like to, question?
I have a question to even back it up a little bit more, because the question I have is, when you say digital asset management system, exactly what do you mean? Because we have a lot of digital assets that we're managing, some in locally developed databases, some in DSpace, some in, trying to think of what else we have, various other systems. So when you say digital asset management, what exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about archival repository? Are we talking about something that's just meant to throw things up quickly? Are we talking about what types of digital objects? What are we talking about here?
Well, I looked this up right before the meeting because I wanted to make sure. But I'm not going to give you a good answer because it's the broadest possible definition. A place to put things is essentially what it is. So perhaps our panelists can throw some light on that.
I view it as pretty much all of the above. The clear distinction between you're dealing with assets and it provides not just a way of ingesting those assets and describing those assets, but also to some extent a front-end user interface to access those as well, as opposed to maybe more broadly content management, which could be more devoted to the web. But I think those lines are even blurring with new applications that are coming out. Scalar is a semantic web authoring tool that some of you may use or have tried, and that sort of then blurs the line a little bit about it. You sort of feel that you're in a website, but it's actually offering you assets with complete descriptions should you want them, and then a variety of ways to navigate them. So I think that's a really good question, and for me, I deal with it by not trying to pin it down into one thing, because the technological change is happening so quickly that having too many definitions, I know my mind is not going to be able to comprehend.
I guess then I have kind of a follow-up question too, because now we have so many systems. What goes where?
You're a library, right?
We are a library.
So that's really the answer. This is not a technological problem. This is basically a policy problem where you're going to put things.
Mm-hmm.
And you have all kinds of things in a library. You put some things on shelves, you put some things in the rare book room, you put some things in other places. So essentially you put it all in the same building or buildings or the same collection concept. And that's really what we try to build, is something that can handle bits. So pages, whatever you want to put down on the disk, and then express that in ways that are useful to the user. So you jump right from almost out of the technology into a philosophical question right away. It's the right question, and then looking to see how much technology you want to support. Do you really want ConTM plus Drupal plus homegrown thing plus Fedora plus Islandora plus Hydra? So you have to basically pick your stack. A lot of them will do duplicative things, so it's kind of good to know where they overlap. So I think Islandora and Hydra are very comparable, but they both use Fedora at the bottom. So they're also complementary as well in some ways. So it all depends on what you want to get done.
Mm-hmm.
What I've done recently, with this whole research digital, you've heard these concepts of data warehouses and data lakes now. It's almost coming data aquifer, you're trying to call it, for where we would put the research data. So I said, how about a data library? Because that's really what we're doing is rebuilding or recasting the library in a digital sense.
Sure.
And One of the reasons I never named the DAMS, it doesn't have a cute name at all, our backend software, is because I want that to disappear into the infrastructure for what's happening. So we are a library, this is just a way that we are a library today and into the future. So it gets more philosophical than technological, I
Yes.
think.
I think that's kind of what I'm personally grappling with. When things start out in the beginning, it seems quite clear, cut and dry. We had selected Content DM because it provided more of a visual space for browsing. You certainly could search through the database. We had used those mostly for archival type resources that were digitized. And it offered a way to also reach out in the community around this hub of digitizing archival collections. However, for the institutional repository, it's supported by the CSU via DSpace, and so that has a clear definition. And as we move on in time, it becomes more and more difficult to decide this needs to go here and this needs to go there, because we're getting different kinds of resources that do different things. And like I said, those lines really get blurred. And so then you're sort of stuck with the question of, do we want to keep building these different configurations for different needs, or rather just make them disappear to the users so that they feel like they go to one place and they can easily navigate across systems, which is why I think the Fedora-based systems are really attractive right now to a lot of people, because it offers you a little bit more flexibility, and you're not buying into a platform and then another one for this and another one for that. We also have a database of finding aids, like many of your institutions do as well. But support for that is difficult right now. And so we're at a crossroads as well. Do we build our own system, or do we look to see what else is out there, rather than put some other kind of platform out there that the user has to learn to navigate? So it's a great question, and it's what I'm dealing with as well. We do that.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Steve is saying. At CalTech, we've had an institutional repository since 2001. And we use ePrints, which is a British software. You can think of it as comparable to DSpace. DSpace did not exist when we started. And it handles things like PDFs and Excel data files and stuff like that really well. It does not handle media objects well at all in terms of the public interface. And so when we started looking at a system for our archives, it was clear that ePrints was not going to suit. And one of the reasons we chose Ironware was because it was Fedora underneath, and we can imagine our IR also moving to a system that is Fedora underneath. And the interface, becoming unified, and the back end just kind of disappearing. Also, most of our traffic comes through Google anyway.
Yes, sir?
Does anybody control access to your digital assets, to your websites? So in other words, do I need to log in to see your assets online?
Depends.
Yeah, it depends. We control access to the high-resolution images in our Ironware image database. Anybody can see the access level medium resolution images, which are watermarked. You have to log in which is automatic for on-campus users, and then can be requested by researchers who want to use them. So we do that kind of control.
So I guess the second part is, so is it the same login as you would use to log in, let's see, the catalog, or is it a different set of credentials that they need? I guess going back to the idea of having multiple platforms for different things, is it a single log?
It's the campus login.
It is, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We use our campus single sign-on.
Actually, I have a follow-up question to that. You talked about starting with the dark archive, and now you're working with data sets. Are those data sets maintained as walled-off private collections with restricted access even among the campus community?
So for the 5 pilot collections that we did over this last little 2-year project, they were explicitly chosen because we wanted them to be open access.
They're all open access.
So they're all open access.
Small O, small A.
Right. Yeah. And there is one, and one of those collections actually is, there's kind of a wrinkle with that, in that our system's essentially acting as a proxy for the research group. They're called Open Topography, and they've got this very established web presence, and they gave us essentially enormous tar files that the biggest one was a terabyte.
Huh.
And so they didn't necessarily want, and we weren't crazy about it either, the idea of just saying, well, anybody can click on that link and go for it.
Yeah,
So
right.
their interface is actually what sort of tunnels users through, and we just act as a proxy to sort of the files.
Just to deal with
And-
that.
But the other examples, the other collections are, but we do have a variety of, I guess, restriction combinations.
Access controls.
Yeah,
But it's
but-
it's very complicated actually, because there's stuff we have right now that requires a click-through agreement, because you might be seeing something culturally sensitive. There's things that we only want you to see if you come in, but we want you to know that they're there. There's some part of our Melanesian collections that have people who passed away, who they don't want those pictures to be on the internet, but the collection, someone should be able to discover as a researcher that that image exists, but they need to come in and do it. Believe it or not, that's an access control to the object itself. So we have layer upon layer of it. In fact, we found it's becoming one of our most complex metadata structures, because there really isn't a good ontology out there for us, so we're inventing as we go along. We'd like to do something simple, like Creative Commons or something like that, but it's pretty flat. So we're inventing a little bit here, but doing it all in RDF, so it kind of makes some sense.
So what technology are you using for that the authorization?
RDF, really, as far as keeping track, you know RDF at all? It's triples. So basically, we break down all of our, XML. So XML is the structure of stuff. It's even more simplistic than that. Everything is just a subject, a predicate, and an object, and you can build with this. Kind of becomes a little triple or a triangle. You can, yes.
Sorry, I'm waiting for you to stop. I just want to.
Okay.
I just want to say something about, well, I'll just say it since you stopped, but there's a big discussion on the list about this going on right now, about using RDF. That's
On Code4lib?
Yeah,
Okay.
I thought you were in it, so
It's possible.
I'm pretty sure I saw your
No, I
name.
started a while ago. But it's really just a way, it's just a way of breaking our data down into small discrete chunks. So we just assert things in text, and then we put that back together again. And when the object is accessed, all that comes with it, and we can kind of see, it's basically just a bunch of gates. Is this okay? Is that okay? Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. If it comes out to all yes, then you get to get it depending on your access, who you are, or not.
Well, that's what I'm saying. How are you authorizing the user itself? I mean, what are you using?
So we use a Hydra front end. Hydra-
So LDAP Active Directory, like how is your user a user?
Active Directory, I would say.
Active
Well,
Directory.
We use single sign-on, so Shibboleth.
Okay.
But Shibboleth is a broker for other access controls.
But you have a lot of data. You have a lot of data elements in that shibboleth that you can check against. Is what I'm asking.
We could, in theory, what we're mostly looking against is, we have a small number of groups, actually we only have a couple of people who actually have curatorial access. And so objects that are restricted, that an anonymous user is not going to get access to, they would have full access to. And then we have the one variable or variant Declan mentioned where we'll have campus level access for, if you're within that IP range, essentially, we say there's some objects that are okay to be viewed there.
And that's a hack. We are doing that by IP range, not by Shibbolized. But we could switch it the other way if we wanted to. For the most part, people don't log in. It's just a public access. So we have public and curators is kind of our most thing. But we throw some things up like click-throughs and letting people know that they have to come see something if we let them know that it's available.
So, good question. So I guess I'm curious, why can't somebody just see, since that's curatorial, why can't they see that if it's just a digital object that they're not going to necessarily damage or, I guess I'm not getting that part.
Well, one of the best examples we had was that slide collection I talked about. The slide collection was built for professors to come in and check out slides in the old days and build a carousel to go teach their class. Those slides came from us putting a book down and taking a picture of the Mona Lisa, we'll say, from that book and creating a slide from it. So it's a resource, it's fair use, they can do that, use it to teach with. If I take that image then, so I could be violating copyright by making that image
If it's on the
available.
internet.
And most of it's copyright issues.
Even if you like fair use, low res or something, or low resolution?
Thumbnail is what we can get away with, as far as I understand, as far as laws are concerned, with anything. Above that, you're a mess right there. So that's one of the reasons we work with ArtStore, was so then they take on the liability for those issues. But there's other ones, like the cultural sensitivity comes up.
Yeah.
sometimes campus only. We have a collection now of these recordings. I think they want to limit to just UC actually, which is going to be really interesting. It's being single sign-on stuff.
Yeah. And some things are just time-based too, they're embargoed, and so they will be available at some point, but
Okay.
they're not now.
The one he just talked about, that open topography, where it's a terabyte, some of the biggest one's a terabyte tar file. Like he said, they have a great web presence, but they know that someday their grant's going to go away, and they're going to go poof, and all the great stuff they have there, they'd like that raw data to persist, to be there. So right now, when anybody wants, we don't actually index any of the metadata about that object into the Solar, so it's not really, if you go to search for it, you're never going to find it. Even if you knew the, sorry, that's wrong, if you knew the ARC, if you knew the identifier to get to it, you could get it, because we have to somehow let them refer to it and share it from their site. And when they share the link out, it actually comes to our site to grab it out, so we allow them to do that. We haven't figured out a better way of dealing with that, so it's kind of through obscurity. It really isn't trying to hide the data, it's just trying to let them be the front-end broker until they may go away.
So I have another question for you and for CalTech. Are either of you storing data, I mean, off-site, as in a commercially contracted cloud service?
Oh, that's a very good question. When our Islandora instance was hosted at Discovery Garden, it was also copied to DuraCloud.
Okay.
That came with our hosting service. When we moved to local, we shut that off because we don't have a contract with DuraSpace for DuraCloud services, although we think we should, or something like it. We were kind of waiting for Deepin, but Deepin is going to take a long time. So we are looking at using DuraCloud for offsite.
So then you others, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So we use Chronopolis for ours, which is Chronopolis.
Chronopolis?
Chronopolis.
Okay.
It's another UCSD project, but it's more than UCSD. So we have the Supercomputer Center has a storage area there. There's one at NCAR in Colorado and one in UMass, the University of Maryland. And there's a system called Chronopolis that basically replicates among those three sites. So we deposit, and it replicates among those three sites, and it performs fixity checks all the time. They're all on spinning disk. And a system called ACE, it's a fixity checker, goes out and checks the checksums on it in real time. It's always checking it back and forth. You gotta have three, because if one of them's wrong, the other two win in a vote. So that's what we're doing there. Chronopolis is becoming part of Deepin. So Chronopolis, you can get to Chronopolis through Chronopolis, you get to it through DuraCloud, and now you'll be able to get to it through Deepin, because it will be one of the Deepin five nodes. That's coming that way. Does that answer?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, I have a question. I want to find out exactly, I have two questions. One, do you give yourself an opportunity to be a third party or second party business branch off with other companies? And what exactly does the meaning of digital mean? I mean, do you give yourself a chance to team up with another company as a first or second, third party, or are you just an international individual company, or independent company of your own, or a family member?
At CalTech, we subcontract various things to outside companies like data conversions and things like that. We don't take in any data from anyone outside CalTech. It's an institutional operation. I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay.
We work with many other universities. I mean, Hydra, I was going to say this earlier, when you were talking about what products to look at or the stacks. You could pick, like Content DM is a fully licensed piece of software from OCLC. But things like Hydra, Fedora, Islandora are all open source. So there's communities around those, and many universities and museums and archives work together to commit coders, to commit we don't just need coders, documenters, testers, use case people, that sort of stuff. So I'm not sure that's quite where your question is going, but we're finding that we're doing a lot more and getting a lot more coverage by working with other universities and other institutions on that sort of stuff. The DGI is a company. There's also what's the word for Media Shelf is now Data Creation Experts is another commercial entity that does hybrid work, and there's a couple others that are springing up from that too. Cherry. You doing Hydra as well?
We're starting to do Hydra. We're actually working on doing a Docker Hydra demo. So you can, because there is nothing like that for Hydra now. So
Cool.
We should talk about that.
I did one for Access last year. Look at the Access stuff last year. It was just one time thing though.
okay.
Mark first, and then Chris.
Yeah, so I'm just kind of curious, so like for all the assets you guys have, and the systems you guys are using, do you guys have, is there some kind of tracking, like what people click through and see, or download or view, and is that important? Is that something that's useful or not, or what's your thoughts on that?
For Islander, we're actually only using Google Analytics at this point. Although there is a module, a Drupal module, an Islander module, that does some kind of statistical tracking that we're going, it's on my list of things to look into. But Google Analytics is yours.
If I could just add, what if you would like to see something that from some kind of metric, what would that be also? You know, if you would, maybe out of curiosity, what that you would like to present to somebody else, maybe, whether what kind of browser, where they come from, maybe I don't know what.
I mean, outside of the basic Google Analytic data, which is
that
kind of what you're talking about. I mean, one thing we've talked about, and there actually was, I think there was a Blacklight plugin for it, but I'm not sure if it's still valid. But I mean, we still have conversations about, well, what are the best categories for facet metadata to have for a discovery layer, and you know, so putting in some custom Google Analytics events just to check and see, you know, is this particular facet group even getting used ever, you know, or have we decided because we think in the library it's important that it's there, but is it actually getting used? So there's some things like that from kind of a usability standpoint that we've talked about, but we haven't gone in and looked up yet. So we're mostly right now just Google Analytics, and then we have some custom reporting that we do for reporting out to CDL on some of our ETD stuff, I think. But,
Yeah, we use Google Analytics as well. I don't really dig into the item level as to which particular items. I am interested in the collections and who's using that, how much is being used, where those users are coming from. There could be specific things that are happening locally that might attribute to an interest in a particular type of collection, be it an event or a holiday that has a shared sort of subject, and it's really interesting to see that. Now, I agree. I wish it was easier. There's probably a lot more that I could find if I spent the time wrangling through all of that data, and then I could make some associations as to what's going on at a deeper level. But that's a time-consuming process, and it's difficult unless you have the resources to really go in and spend a fair amount of time. So that would be a super thing if they could put something together that adds more different ways of filtering through the data to see exactly where it comes from and isolate some of those things.
From a future standpoint, there's one thing I'd love to see is a lot of it with papers now, there's this concept of impact factor. If you've written a paper and published a paper, what is the impact then of that paper, how citable is it? There's a number of things that go into that. How about research data? How about that data set? How can we somehow enable that with a DOI or something like that that will allow we can see what is the impact of this repository, the individual pieces, then as a whole. What is working well? What is actually what's the good stuff? What's the cherries?
So it sounds like analytics is the one you guys all use, Google Analytics. Have you guys noticed if there's any trend between mobile and desktop? Is it desktop primarily that the users are, or are they starting to be mobile? I can't imagine doing research on mobile for that kind of thing, but maybe college students do that. I don't know.
it's still primarily desktop. I mean, we've definitely seen a steady but slow kind of linear increase with mobile. And so, I mean, when we created the latest Hydra head that we've released for our digital collections, I mean, it's responsive, it scales down, it looks good on a phone, but it is still a relatively small share of it.
And it's iPhone, or phone, not tablet. You see this, I think the person by that reason, the growth in tablet was much slower than the growth in phone.
Yeah.
Phones are getting bigger, maybe that's why.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, for DAMS, for public libraries, the growth in in phones in particular seems to be trending probably a little more quickly.
Chris, you had a question?
Oh, it was about Chronopolis before.
Yeah.
Is it available for other UCs, or is that a UC San Diego?
It's available to the world.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think chronopolis.ucsd.edu, you can find out more about it out there. It is not cheap. I mean, the per terabyte is, I think right now it's advertised about $1,500 per terabyte per year. I know, it's expensive, but it's basically, because it's in three places, so it's really 3 terabytes. And then it's all the people involved to manage that, and all the fixed fee checking and stuff. So it's not cheap, but it's preservation, which is above I'm an IT person. I wasn't a librarian. I'm still not a librarian, but I kind of feel like I am at this point. But there's an IT level of 2 copies and you're good. It used to be we bleed into, I don't bleed in tapes, but tapes are really good enough. But for librarians, for archives, it's just not good enough. You have to go to a higher level.
Yeah, I'm expecting the big earthquake to be coming pretty soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll actually comment on that too. So at USC, we host our own stuff. Well, so we use Content DM, but that's a hosted solution. So we give it some tips, it converts it to JPEGs and puts that up on the public access, but then it spits the tip back at you and says you're responsible for preserving that. So we have our own big digital repository that backs up the Show Foundation. So the digital library is at 1% of all the stuff that's on there. But my boss Sam cut a deal with Clemson, so we back up each other's stuff across the country because we know we're a big country. So the system at USC itself is, I think, triple checked within itself. But then just because we're in such a volatile area, we also back it up across the country.
You guys have pipe between each other, or how fast?
I think they use internet to kind of show. I'm not sure exactly on what
It's a lot of
they do.
data.
Yeah.
Pretty.
UCLA is backing up to Berkeley at the other end of the San Andreas Fault. There's room for improvement.
Is that just the library, or is it the whole campus?
That's the library. The whole campus is also backing up to Berkeley. The important stuff, research, forget it. But payroll, yes. And there's also a site buried 400 miles under Cheyenne Mountain with armed guards, the usual.
Right, well, I'm actually interested in that because our campus backs up to various sister campuses around the state, but that's just the web presence at the enterprise level. That's not the library. We're still doing tape backups, except for our videos, and that's San Diego Supercomputing Center.
It's big and expensive, but this is the promise of TPN. We all hope that it will become widespread. It will take a while.
Well, how does locks play into this, or a local locks community? Silence. What are you talking about?
There's lack of expertise, but did anybody move on?
Well, not for our collection.
We did for a little while, we're not doing it right now. It's focused, I believe, on journal holdings.
Right.
Well, yeah, but if you.
But that technology could certainly have an application.
Right, if you wanted to establish a private locks network,
You could.
you could.
Yes.
And as in conversations with locks people, they're saying that this would be any of your homegrown digital assets. And so the technology that they're using there, I don't know if you can call it technology, but the process
Yeah.
of pulling, redundancy, but pulling each other to make sure that, hey, is this copy still the same? That is the same technology if you were managing your own local stuff.
I think we're looking ahead to DPM,
What's
which
locks?
does a similar thing.
Lots of copies keep stuff safe.
Distributed network, I think it's from you, right?
Stanford. David Rosenthal.
Rosenthal, yeah, it's a distributed bunch of nodes that basically keep information about what's been used in the journal stuff. There's Portico as well, that's what they do. But again, they've been primarily focused on journals.
But the model for DPM is not to send multiple nodes and fixed fee checking across them.
The model is pretty much expressed in the title.
Yeah.
Right, well, you guys are great because I haven't even had to ask my second question.
Time for another question.
So since this is Code4lib or live, depending on who you want to be, You guys have all touched upon the modifications that you've done on that out of the box or the software that you have. What have you done that's worth sharing and that you can tell us about, and how has it worked for you, and has it been worth the effort? Declan, why don't we start with you guys, because it sounds like you're running a brigade of bulldozers right through the middle of the established software and making it work. By analogy, of course.
I would say that.
Perhaps a squad.
Surgeon's scalpel.
There you go.
We've been very happy, I hate to say that, with our backend. We've been very happy with the DAMS backend for many years. But we're a boutique. You know, you end up writing something really cool, and you're the only one who knows about it. You're the only one who can actually, you're the only one doing the work on it and doing things. So I started talking less about the product and more about the concepts quite a few years ago with RDF and things like that. And trying to push those agendas as opposed to, you got to use our product. We tried for a little bit, but it just nobody was ready for it. And Fedora was getting a lot of momentum. It was getting a lot of attention, a lot of good programming effort, a lot of good funding too, and some amazing concepts in there. So we jumped on basically the Fedora bandwagon. So we're still using our own backend, not Fedora, but I've committed for the last 2 years, full, half an FTE, but a full provision that we're asked for to be part of the project, of the Fedora project, FTE, half an FTE, to work on Fedora 4 core. So Hydra came along, Hydra and Islandora both came along because Fedora does not have a front end. It's just not a friendly system. It's basically, it's there, you get it, and you spend 2 years writing a front end to get it to work well for your processes. And you'll find it's not because it's a web problem or a technology problem, you get it because you find out all these processes and all these workflows are different everywhere you go. And every department you go, and everywhere you go. It's 17 of them in the one same library. So it's a lot of work doing it. So Hydra and Islandora came to sit on top of those with some standards that are, like Ruby is a framework, right? So Hydra is more of a framework for how do you work with the backend repository. Islandora the same way, using some of the Drupal magic. We wanted some of that. We wanted to be involved in that and not just be kind of doing our own thing all the time. So I committed people to Fedora 4 and we switched our front end out from what we were doing, used our custom PAS, public access system, ripped it out, put Hydra on top, and basically modified, like you say, in a thin layer of API to make our back end look like Fedora to Hydra so that we can play with the Hydra community and do things there. So I think that's more scalpel than bulldozer. But, in the same time, we've been able to kind of infect Fedora both with staff and with concepts to get the RDF stuff, the triple store stuff, which it had a long time ago. Eddie Shin had a lot of these concepts back with Mulgara and things like that in the past. But it's matured a lot through people banging on it, and we've got to be part of that, which is kind of cool. And now I'm on the Fedora leadership committee with a number of other people, and we're having a Fedora technology review that's starting next week. With the architecture that's going on right now. So that's all worth sharing, I think. And we just say one more time, we don't just need coders for this stuff, for Fedora or Hydra or Islandora. We need testers, we need documenters, we need people who think about things. So don't think that the open source community is just for coder geeks. It's for all library geeks.
Can I just say one thing, and that is that in both Hydra and Islandora, they've reached sort of a critical mass where they're making a difference in Fedora. They're just like you said, and there's a lot of contribution back. Right now, we've mostly contributed back to Islandora, but we have stuff to go into Fedora too, and it's making it more library friendly.
How many programmers work on your system?
6. Yeah, we're blessed.
5 to 6.
That's
Well,
nice.
It's a mix.
some days he considers himself a manager, sometimes
No, we have a designer who goes on and off our digital collections work and other projects.
The front end?
Yeah.
You throw them out when they get in the way.
Those same 6 are the ones who do everything for us. So all of our business systems, everything we do, we sprint. We have an agile system where we sprint back and forth on the
Oh, wow,
things.
okay.
DAMS is a big part of that, though,
Yeah.
getting that stuff working.
Is that also with the photo and the picture of the digital when you do the business plot, you score the name, the user name, and sign it? Do you also get the photo picture with that?
The picture of what, sorry?
The picture of the printing of the person's business or the name tag or anything you want to take and digit on the phone or however you want to take and edit it in your disk on your computer?
Basically, we will take any sort of digital object that we can get, that they want to store and get back again. So,
Okay, so and another question I have to ask you, is it illegal if I take someone else's business in their name and edit it underneath, forge it underneath my business name, or without them knowing, or do I have to get permission to take and do that?
it certainly sounds like a lawyer question.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sorry, I'm talking a lot.
Oh, okay, at CalTech, once again, I'll remind you how small we are. I'm the only person working on the Islandora installation. I'm also the Linux sysadmin. I'm also the institutional repository programmer. I also manage a bunch of other systems. So there hasn't been a lot of time to do things yet. We are moving in the direction of doing a lot more with Islandora and a lot less with our IR system, which is mature. What we spent our time on, other than my tiny little Drupal module to link to our Aeon system, is batch processing, data manipulation for batch loading. We have a large collection of data that's going to be our next big thing in Islandora. It's a guy named Paul McCready, who is an engineer who got his PhD at CalTech and who was into, among other things, human-powered flight. If you remember the Gossamer Albatross and the Gossamer Condor. But we've got the McCready papers, which is not just papers, it's also videos and engineering drawings and all kinds of stuff. And that's all been digitized, and what I'm working on is how to get it all into Islandora to find appropriate content models for the different kinds of content that we have, and to write scripts in mostly Perl, because that's what I've been doing for a long time, and I can do it quick, and XSLT, of course, for metadata. And it can be a kind of Rube Goldberg machine kind of process. What we're trying to do is set up rational workflows that will serve us in the future. So we're really workflow focused at this point. And that's really all we can do at our scale. We can't do big contributions and new wonderful modules for Islandora. We just don't have time. We are very grateful to the community for all the wonderful stuff that is out there, which we will be able to make use of.
You can provide bug reports though.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, that batch loading stuff is pretty interesting.
I have a question for you, but so you said you're a smaller library, a lot of staff to help you work with that, but did you install Islandora by yourself, or is that something local, or is it something you're paying someone?
Our original installation was done by DGI. They also set us up a test server, which we ran locally, but they set it up. It took them about 4 hours. Just, it didn't cost very much to have them set it up. Then I tackled doing the install myself for our local service, and it took me 3, maybe 4 weeks of head banging to get it right. I think there are tools out there now that make it a little easier if you can use Vagrant and Puppet and stuff like that, which I was not familiar with. There are also people who have set up one-step installs. It's supposed to, scripts that are supposed to do everything. I found those scripts useful for following what I'm going to do manually. I'm going to install this, then I'm going to set this, then I'm going to install this other thing. It was not simple. I think it will get better.
Do you have any running costs? Any running costs on your installation?
We don't track them. No, I mean, for our...
Any running, do you have to pay anything a year or anything in terms of so do you have to pay any server maintenance or do?
Okay, we're running locally now.
Okay.
When we were running on DGI, yes, we paid them handsomely for their hosting service, which is one of the reasons we wanted to move to local. I mean, they did an excellent job, but it was expensive. So now it's just part of our overall overhead. Now that we have all of our servers locally, we have dev, test, and production all locally. And as far as having things hosted or set up for you, like Cherry Hill, I think will do it as well.
Sure.
So there are options.
Yeah, when we
Price
actually
competition,
start
maybe.
offering on a wholesale basis Islandora hosting, we'll probably do Docker, I think, but I don't know,
Uh-huh.
and we'll probably make that available.
Yeah.
You know, because
What is that again?
Just explain what
Huh?
Docker is.
okay, Docker. Okay, now I have to figure out how to explain what it is that doesn't reference other things I have to explain, like Chroot. But Docker is a container, and that's about as technical as I can get without having to explain all the other stuff. That you pretty much put your server in and run it on another server. So we'll run a big server. It's like virtualization, but not. It's actually running on the server rather than running in a virtual server. So you have a server that's running Docker, running boot to Docker, running Vagrant, or running something to hold these containers, and then you just spin up the containers on the server. And it shares the overall resources. You can control that to some degree, not quite as much as you can with VMware, but enough. And it just allows you to spin these things up quickly, because as we've learned, like everyone who uses Hydra and Islandora, that it's not quick to set it up. You know, even with chef scripts, you know, it's not quick to set up.
So you end up starting these things, and they have like 18 dependencies. You have to download this, download this, download this. So someone does all that work for you, does it in a container, kind of like what they do with the VM. But it's a little simpler to get running. And sometimes you don't need root to do it, right? Do you need root to run Docker, a Docker container?
Well, it depends on, for deployment to a production system, yeah, I wouldn't want anyone else running in there. But if I have,
Testing or something.
I can put a testing server and let anyone run it.
One of the fun things about Code4lib is that we go off on tangents, and that's great, but I know Steve has to leave in about 10 minutes.
Oh, it's okay. It's a little room.
Okay, but I do want to give you a chance to answer the question.
Sure.
Could I ask you to move over like 6 inches so you're more on camera while you're talking?
So Content DM is, because it's an out-of-the-box piece of software, it is, you know, it's rigid, it's not really very flexible. It does provide administrators to make some choices about maybe the look and feel of the web pages. You can do simple things like create a color palette, and turn some features on and off, but it operates for the landing pages of your individual collections. It uses a WYSIWYG environment, which really constrains what it is that you can do. And you know, for some collections, they come from different locations. There's multiple provenances that you want to highlight and kind of maintain that connection to the context of the documents that populate the collection, and that becomes difficult to do when you have these larger thematic collections. Architecturally speaking, you can't, like in these Fedora-based systems, have collections and sub-collections. So I had to think about, well, how can we sort of mimic this for the user, and that's just completely transparent to the user, and that is to not even use their out-of-the-box landing pages for collections that really require some more you know, complex interfaces. So you know, on a few of our collections more recently, we've just designed web pages that operate a little bit more like an interface, that in some ways guide users to view things in a certain way, but always give them the option to look at everything all at once, because that architecture simply doesn't really exist in Content DM. And so for us to make some customizations, you would have to have some resources to really go in there and do some coding and change things the way you want. And we don't have dedicated coders at all. And so, you know, Hydra started to gain some buzz, and with Project Hydra, we saw that, wow, there's all these other institutions with more resources than us that are doing things that we need, and that we really should be paying attention to what's going on here, because some of them can actually produce something out of this that might be viable for us. So obviously Content DM is not paying me because I'm not speaking fondly, but I really should, because it does work well, particularly if you haven't dedicated resources and you don't require much customization. It really does, it's almost a set and forget once you get it in and get it going, and you do have somebody to go to for support. If this is the kind of institution that you have and you want some kind of platform to provide access to your digital collections without a huge labor force behind it, then you want to consider this. We're in a position now that the needs are growing, and we don't want to jump into another stack, as you say, but rather look at everything, all of digital services, in a little more holistic manner. So we're really trying to pay attention to what other institutions are doing. Yes?
Did you say that you had a locally hosted instance of Content?
Yes, we do. So, and Elizabeth, thank goodness, provides the maintenance for that. But beyond that, we don't have people that can dedicate time into customizing the interface.
See, the new version is not all hosted?
Yes, and last that I heard, it is an all-hosted service. I suspect it will have some significant changes to it. I haven't seen anything yet. I think we might be a year or two out of the release, but that's what I heard.
Then is OCLC going to take all your metadata, as OCLC does?
They already do, to a certain extent. Yeah, it's funny, we have, users can tag and provide comments, but you don't really get to control and harvest that. They keep it on their end. So, it's all things like that that are kind of annoying, but, yeah.
I have a question about your plans. I know you don't know what's going to come in the next version when it's hosted only, but how much customization have you done to your own locally hosted instance that's going, if it's out of your control, would be difficult to maintain? Do you know?
So there's a certain level of customization that an administrator can do, and that's built into the system, and you can go and tweak things here and there. And so, I've exercised that. You can select which elements are used for your faceted searching. And depending on the collection that you're using, it will entirely make sense that you might want to change those from collection to collection. So in that sense, these things are very good. But there hasn't been a customization within the app itself. It's been more Band-Aid fixes, providing on the landing page and front-end user face to sort of give it the sense that the collection is structured slightly differently and give you different points of access. We like to use data visualizations on some things. Integrate Google Fusion tables as another point of access if the collection could utilize that. Yeah.
So just to also respond to this, the special pages that Steve designed, so for the data visualization, for example, those exist on the same server, but they're not customizations of Content DM.
Okay.
They're just like portals into Content DM. And I don't know how you got that data if you had to, we had to extract that static data.
Right. So
it's
that's
not,
another
yeah.
thing. I like to use the metadata and pull out different things so it can be used in a variety of different ways. And that's one of the ways to sort of inform other applications and data visualizations that users can use to engage with the collection. When you just put these collections out there and the context is missing, it becomes difficult unless you're an expert on the subject of what the collection is about. In my experience, the pure database searching environment is very cold. I think data visualizations can do a lot to give you sort of the rough contours of what is in a collection prior to searching it, so that you can be a little bit more successful in those searches. I think you were first.
I just want to say, there was a time when we did extensive customization. It used to be a JavaScript-driven interface completely. And then they went into this sort of weird hybrid PHP, JavaScript, also variable files that define colors. It's a very they sort of stacked it on top of itself in a way, so despite my misgivings about some of the code validation and the accessibility of some pieces, we've kind of left it as it is because there's just no point in doing that much customization if it's going to be wiped out with the next update.
So we've done some customization of content DM at USC. Now we're on the hosted system, but you can inject a lot of JavaScript. So we change a lot of stuff after the page loads. And
But really only with JavaScript, right?
yeah.
Like I remember in the previous version, 5, you could actually get access to more PHP stuff if you wanted to.
So if you are hosting it locally, you can do some stuff, I'm sure.
Right.
But since we're you know going through OCLC, all we can do is inject some JavaScript. But you know we've done some interesting stuff. Rick created a Google Map plugin that kind of displays the hits on the map above the actual thumbnail.
Oh, okay.
So you can do a little bit with it, but it slows down the page loads when you're injecting all this stuff. Right.
All right, well, I have 57 more questions to ask, but we are out of time. So please join me in thanking our panelists.
But we're not breaking for lunch yet. I've asked my esteemed colleagues to hand out your votes. Everybody gets 10 votes, 10 blue dots. And I'm going to talk about the different topics. So you can, if there's a topic of interest, you can put 1 blue dot by it, or 3, or 5, or all 10 of them if you're really interested in that topic. But you get a total of 10 votes. And so we've got all the DAMS over here. So if you want to talk about any of these topics as well as languages, we've got Content DM, DSpace, Islandora, Hydra, Fedora, Rosetta, and then languages Java, JavaScript, and Angular as a dialect of JavaScript, Python, Django, and PHP, and then 1 for generic Drupal. So you can, again, put 1 dot on any of these or all the dots everywhere. You get to allocate them however you want. So those are the languages and DAMs. There's ILSs back here if you want to talk about an ILS. There's Polaris, and there's a question about using crystal reports and patron self-registration. There's Carl,
Self-immolation.
Voyager, Circe, Millennium, and Sierra. And some specific questions using usernames for logins instead of barcodes, patron self-registration. So if you know about these topics or are curious about them, you can vote for those. And we've got a couple more generic questions back here. Computer availability maps. So if your patrons want to know what workstations are available in your library, having a map available for that.